Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to the DM Roundtable for November 2022. If you're wondering where the October one was, there was no DM Roundtable in October. Instead, we did a second Patreon D&D game. This is a chance for patrons and I to get together and discuss topics in tabletop RPGs, and by sharing our ideas, thoughts, and experiences, we can all become better DMs or GMs. The DM Roundtable discussions are open to all patrons at every level of patreon.com/RogueWatson. You don't have to be an active participant. You can jump in here and lurk to your heart's content, and we are glad to have you. This month's topic, as determined by the Patreon poll, is player rotation. Starting and finishing a campaign with the same players is typically the goal, but that's often not the case in the average D&D campaign. Whether due to real-life scheduling, or player drama, or just lost interest, how do we deal with players leaving and new players joining in the middle of ongoing campaigns and storylines? Joining me for this month's DM Roundtable, we have Stan.
Good evening.
Genocider.
Hello.
And Christopher.
Hello, good evening.
Oh, so this is something that I had blissfully no experience with until recently doing the Patreon D&D games. I've been blessed with having a very consistent group of extremely old friends with which to play D&D with, so I haven't had to deal with having players come and go, and I never did the random pickup games or Adventures League things or anything like that. And then the Patreon D&D games kind of introduced me to the concept of using different players, having kind of the concept of coming and going, but it's a little bit different in my case because a lot of players aren't necessarily permanently leaving. Instead, they'll just, will not be there for a week and somebody else will come in. But still, it creates a unique environment in terms of, just dealing with party composition from a game point of view, but also a player point of view. Like, if I wanted to plan for certain players to be there for certain games, that could be very difficult down the road. And then how do you explain that in universe, having, players suddenly just disappear and reappear? And I've always looked at Acquisitions Incorporated as my personal model for a show/D&D campaign, and I thought they did the same thing. They often had players come and go. They had a set group for a while, for years, but then that group kind of developed, and some players left, and then new ones came, and then they got to a point where it was almost a pretty regular rotation between every couple games, and they just kind of explained it away like, oh, you look over and that person's gone, and now another person, comes in during the story or something. They kind of made it work, and it wasn't ever a very serious game, so I think it could work a little bit better that way, and we're just, in it for the fun and the storytelling cinematic feel. So that was kind of how I've always looked at modeling. But I'm interested to hear from all of you what your experiences are, either as players or DMs or GMs, with having not necessarily just talking about a player not being there, because I think that's almost a separate topic, although that will probably come up here because it overlaps pretty obviously, but more on the lines of like players permanently or very long term leaving in the middle of a campaign, or just having another person come on board. Stan, do let me know if you have experience with this.
I ran a 4-year and a 5-year campaign, and so I had, in the one campaign, I almost had a complete turnover. I think I was running
Really?
I had a complete turnover in what we refer to as my girls' game. By the end of it, there were no original players.
Wow.
I had a complete party turnover.
Can I
So
can I pry, or is it gets too personal
sure.
about what? Okay.
Um, Circumstances changed. We had one of the ladies got married, and life changes, life happens. She's expecting her first, so they step out of the game. Some of the others go. It's like, well, it's not as much fun not having this person at the table. Well, I had brought in my niece. One of my nieces come in and she's playing, and I've got, as you know how it is, like I've got a story that's going to take me at least another 6 months to wrap this sucker up. And my niece wanted to play, so I got two of my other friends to come in, and they filled in that gap. And then I had another buddy come in as a special guest NPC that everyone just loved, and so he ended up joining the party. So at the end, it turned out to be 2 guys and 2 girls that finished out my girls campaign.
So it was a gradual turnover of events that just happened
Yeah,
with
I
certain.
mean, grand total, if you had a 4-person party, I probably had 7 or 8 different people playing that game.
Wow.
I mean, over time, like one of my original players, she was only in it for 3 games. She'd never played D&D before and went, "Yeah, this isn't really my thing." And we wrote her out of the story. She had an epic send off, and then someone else filled in, and
That was
then
my follow up. Sorry, that was my follow
Mhm.
up. Also, was do you write that into the story somehow? I guess because you're given a heads up, a 2 weeks notice, basically,
Mhm.
that you get a
Yeah.
chance to make that part of the story.
I had was able to the one she to the party. It looked like she laid down her life so they could get away, and so had this great send off. Well, they find out later that she was captured and escaped, so she's now a character running around in my universe.
Oh, okay.
And then one of my best DM moments was a player's leaving. Our paladin decided to, life circumstances happened, had to leave. And it was one of the best con jobs I have ever done as a DM. Um, Old Gnawbones, the big bad green dragon that lives on the Sword Coast, has the ability to impersonate a silver dragon. And so, and our Order of the Dragon Knight wants to always serve a dragon. So Old Gnawbones shows up in the guise of a silver dragon. They make the bargain. I'm going to be their knight commander, and as they're flying off with that character, she drops the disguise into her green scaly self, and all they heard was their friend screaming as she flies off. I had
Dark.
objects thrown at me. I had every girl at the table jumped up. They were chucking stuff, and I looked at our draconologist, and I go, "Check your book." And she whips out, and I gave her a little notebook of all the stuff that her character knew. She starts flipping through, and it's like 1, 2. He told us the entire night. I was dropping clues all night that she was not who she said she was.
Oh, that's cool.
And
You
so they
got the
went
big
from
reveal moment.
that was one of my best cons.
Yeah, the Kaiser
So,
shows a staring at the bulletin board. That's awesome. That's interesting though, having a complete turnover. So like when the game starts, did you have like these grand plans for these characters in terms of integrating the story, and then that had to just completely change over time?
um, this is Horde of the Dragon Queen. So, you're already on a railroad.
Okay.
And so, but I always want to pull in character stories. One of the kind of like what Chris did with you guys with Storm Kings. That everybody had their little side quests
Connections
and
to yeah.
those kind of things, and where he had the entire half the continent to play with, to run around and do stuff with. You can do that with Horde of the Dragon Queen. You're running into one of the draconologist. Volo is one of her adversaries. So when they get to Waterdeep, she's got this competition with him, going on, and then you had the paladin burning into dragon, some of the dragon stuff, and it's pulled in a lot of different backstories and stuff. But I had one PC they wrote out of their character that they got PTSD. They were a cleric that multi-classed in the fighter because they'd seen some stuff, tired of their friends getting hurt, and realized I've went too far. And that's how we wrote them out, is I need to go home and get my head on straight.
Oh wow.
And she retired.
A
And
lot of
that's
very
how
serious player exits, yeah.
and I tell as well established, I run a realistic game,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of drama and stuff in it.
Nice.
So a lot of different ways you can write them out.
I do like the ones that give you the keys to that character as a future like NPC or villain or just recurring character. That's always fun.
Did not kill any of them off, but the one that went with Old Gnawbones is now a junior big bad.
Nice.
By the end
I
of the
like that.
campaign, they were terrified of her because they knew what she could do when she was on their side.
Mm-hmm.
And they figured out he's been leveling her up the same time he has with us. I don't want to fight that.
Level scale. Elder Scrolls
I
rules.
don't want a piece of that. Nope.
Genocider, do you have experience as a player or DMGM with serious player rotation?
I do. So I grew up as a military brat, so me and all my friends' families would move every couple of years. So we had a lot of rotation. And when I was a DM, I would always want to write like an intro and an exit for people who come and leave. As a player, like I don't really care about that now. It's just just get this guy in here. Like
I just want to show up.
yeah.
Do you feel like you need a primer on at least what's going on in the story, or you just want to be like, just I'll sit in the background for the first session and see what's going on?
Yeah, so I think a primer would help, but the game that I'm playing in now is the latter. Like I joined kind of in the middle of the campaign, and I'm just like playing my guy as a newbie, and just rolling with that.
Yeah. Have you been able to mesh with all the different personalities and people at the table? I assume you like some more than others, but have you ever just said you drop into a game and be like, oh, I love playing D&D, but this group is not going to work? Or were you able to kind of take that group with you?
So the game I'm playing now is with my real life family, like my brothers and stuff. So like I kind of found one character that I attach myself to, and we have that going there, and yeah, it's been good.
Nice. Christopher, what your experience is as a player or a DM with a player rotation?
Sure. So for my DM side, I've only really had to deal with this a few times with um I mean I run with the kids. So teenagers, they want to play, then they don't want to play. So we just kind of handle, my son didn't want to play his character for about 2 months. So that just the character just went away. And I kind of treat it like soap operas. Soap operas go on forever, and the cast keeps going, but it's the same type of thing. And
Same world, yeah.
they're just not here, or we cover it in like a 2 minute thing, and then that character is just like out of it. Right? They went to go do a side quest for somebody they met down, and maybe they won't be back, or they come back, and then we've had them course that come back as like, well, maybe you come back as this other character. That if you weren't having fun with that class, come back as this other thing, and we reintroduce them into the party. It was with Dragons of Ice Peak, where you grab all those little missions. So it was kind of easy to just attach him to one of those missions, and then he joined back in, and things were well. As a player, outside of the Patreon D&D game, we have games with adults that, it's like a every other week game. Some get fully pushed because we don't have quorum. But the ones where we do have quorum, a lot of times we'll play.
How many is a quorum? Does everybody have to be there, or?
Usually 3.
Okay.
We'll play if there's 3.
Okay.
But these are like parties of 5.
Yeah.
So having 2 people miss is kind of does weird things to the party composition.
Yeah.
And it's like, however, we're in things where this is a Dungeons and Dragons as a stress relief, as a we all work really hard, so we're like all kind of like, let's play, right? It's good. Mental health
Yes.
games. And for those, it's super loose. If 2 people can't make it, then that's fine. We're not. Sounds like I would really love to play in stands. But this other group, we're not.
Stan will kill your ass if you're not there.
Right. You will go out in a blaze of glory, whether you know it or not. but we and there's some overlap from people wise in the two games, right? So some of us are there all the time, and some of us have trouble making it. Um, we have not had a, well, hey, our tank is not here or this is not here. And fortunately, we haven't had the moment of in the middle of a player arc, someone is not there.
That's my biggest concern
Um,
that I wanted to ask about also. I'm glad you brought that up, is like there are, if you're planning for a whole session and this person is going to, it's to explore this person's character arc, and then they're not, and this kind of bleeds over into just having a player not there too. But, or if you've got a player had like a very important role in your campaign, like they had a very central, maybe it was a twist or something that turns out they were like the brother of the big bad or something, whatever. And then all of a sudden that player leaves the campaign. You're like, oh man, this was like really devastating to my storyline. And I was gonna see if anybody had experience trying to fix that too.
The girls game.
Yeah.
So it's Horde of the Dragon Queen. Draconologist quits.
Yeah.
You start looking around. How many characters around here can speak Draconic? If you don't have that in Hot DQ, you've got a problem. There's just certain skills you have to have as a team in that campaign, or you're just not going to have a good time.
Yeah.
So you had to, and you had to come up with creative ways of, people leaving, like the wizards, long lost. I did a Dread Pirate Roberts. The wizard's supposedly dead husband is actually now he was captured by pirates down in Chult, and so she leaves and goes down there, and that's how my niece came in. Is they needed someone else to fill in that role. They needed a bodyguard, and she came in as a paladin.
Has anybody had an issue where a player left and they were like the tank or the healer, to use the mechanical MMO terms, and then a new player came in and they're like, I want to play a sorcerer or something, like a bard or something that's not that role, and that like that really changes the party comp.
When the cleric left, the next person that came in wanted to play wizard.
Yeah. We can run into that a little bit with our Patreon D&D game too, with certain characters leaving.
I was gonna say that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Someone got volunteered to play tank last session.
Yeah. Still have the scars to prove it.
Yep.
Yeah, that creates it's funny as a DM, I'm not sure I would specifically try to build around that necessarily. I would, it's just balance is such a hard thing anyway with party comps. And so even though, yeah, you're missing a tank, but you've got, a second sorcerer, or if you've got, I don't know, whatever, but if you got like more melee people or something, maybe you could throw different combinations of creatures at the party to either end. You could either exploit that weakness that the party has, even though it's not, their fault, or let them just dominate, because like, oh, well, we've got, 2 sorcerers this week. Maybe I'll throw a bunch of little guys at them, and then the sorcerers can take advantage of all their AoE spells or something. From a DM point of view, that's something I could look at. My biggest worry, though, is the quest arc thing. It's like, how, if I don't necessarily, especially in my point of view, if I don't necessarily know even who my players are, I mean, I have a pretty good, guess, but who my players are going to be week to week, how would I try and form those player-specific quest arcs, like entire sessions that are designed for like, hey, your player is going on this. It's, video game terms like the BioWare games did this very well, or older game, the Baldur's Gate series or something, Neverwinter Nights, to use D&D games, where all your characters had like, your party members had like one specific quest line, and you were to go to a dungeon or an area and do a thing. I like doing those in D&D. I think that's very fulfilling for the characters, and that's, they can get cool rewards out of that, and that's something you can design right from the start. Although player rotation then comes into it, about having to then decouple that and then add a new one. But then if you've got different players, rotating in and out every single time you play, then that gets a lot trickier to try and plan for that. I'm not sure I know what the best answer is, other than to try to just see like, okay, I know I've got, a thing coming up where I want this certain person needs to be there, so maybe they just need to be able to lock in. And maybe everybody is just given at least one, session that's going to be focused on their player character that they can have that session, because that's something that's I'm running into as being a tricky thing to prep for, is how to do those players single player focused missions or quest arcs or whatever else without having that set team.
I think it goes with the meme. Have you tried talking to the player yet?
Yeah.
Yes, no, and you get that flow chart.
Yeah.
That communicating ahead of like, hey, I've got some really important stuff coming up for your character. Can we lock in the next two sessions? These 2 dates.
Yeah.
You're really gonna want to. Trust me, you're really gonna want to be there.
Yeah.
If you set that and they're going like, oh, now they're really interested, they're really invested.
Mm-hmm.
They're the one that's going to show up early for that session and be all ready to go and hyping it to their friends. Like, I don't know what he's got planned, but this is going to be good.
Yeah.
And so just a little communication can help with that.
I've run into a few times in the main game I've had where I had maybe not a player focused one, but it was definitely going to involve that player's character more. And then I was told in advance that player wouldn't be able to make it, and then I could make adjustments going into it. Probably the worst case scenario is if you've got that one set up, you think the player is going to be there, and then all of a sudden the session is about to start, and that player, says, "Hey, I can't make it," and you're like, "Oh shit, this is not going to work." Then go ahead, Genocide. Are you going to say something?
Do you feel the need to write players in and out of the session, like if they come and go?
That's a good question.
Like, is the guy not here? He's whatever. Like,
yeah, and I want to open that to all of you as well. In terms of the story, like what is the excuse for that character not being there? I think, again, Acquisitions Incorporated is actually my good example of them doing that. Sometimes it's pretty serious, where it's like, hey, obviously we're just starting a quest arc, and these are the players we have. And others, it was very obvious they were in the middle of, a dungeon or an event or something, and it was literally like they turn around, that person's gone, and then all of a sudden this other person happens to be there. There's no way they should be there normally, but they just show up. So it was just almost a crazy, hilarious coincidence. Somebody shows up at the right time. But that also makes for good cinematic storytelling. I don't think we've really... so far in the Patreon game, which is the example I have, I don't really think we've even accounted for it much yet. I try... If you remember, when I started the Rime of the Frostbane campaign, I tried to have a rule for this. And I don't know if you guys remember that Chris and Heather were very vocal in pushing back against me. But it was, hey, if the player isn't there, then the player character is like sucked into a little soul gem or something. And they're immune. You remember that? And they're like immune from all damage. I forgot. I read about this and thought it'd be a good idea. They're like immune from all damage, so their player character's not there, but they're still there with the party. They just can't interact with anything, and they're not a force at all to be there. And my party had a shit fit about that. They're like, well, no way. We don't want to be without that player. And here I thought I was providing a service, saying, hey, nobody has to run this player character. But the pushback I got was like, oh, well, I guess we're just going to be running that player character then. And so far, to the player's credit, it hasn't been that bad. Like, occasionally we just have the player, auto attack or whatever else they have to do. So that hasn't worked out like I thought. Maybe the Patreon game we can incorporate that, because right now we don't have that, right? We don't have that player character there present at all. So I thought, well, maybe I could do that in the Patreon game, is have, if the person's not there, they're sucked into their little soul gem thing. I don't know why I picture like Diablo for this, but they're sucked into like a little soul gem thing. The party, they turn like an inventory item for the party almost. So, because the thing is, I always want every player character to be there with the group, but they're just not in the active party. And I realize that gets really weird narratively, and especially in Roll20, where we're visualizing, tokens on a battle map, and it's weird to have another character rotate in, and especially in this session we're in. We just traveled 400 miles to a different city. Well, any player who wasn't there, they'll rotate in again. They'll just be there, right? So, of course, they traveled with you guys, but we didn't mention them traveling with everybody, and you didn't get to see them. necessarily on the map. So it does create a weird issue there that maybe we can brainstorm something. But my initial thought was, we can use the weird soul gem thing idea. What I don't want to do is have to keep up with all the tokens and everything, and have for players that aren't there and have to put them on the map. I know for an old ass video game, I don't know if you guys know the reference to this, the Shining Force series. I played to death on the Sega Genesis. It was a JRPG series where the battles played out like chess matches, and I fucking loved that. But you collected heroes left and right. Like every single battle and event, you gained a new hero. You could only field 12 at a time. It was a proto Fire Emblem series, I guess. And you had this magic caravan you acquired around the time you got your like 12th member, and then anybody you weren't using, they were inside this little automated wagon thing. Like a community Pokeball, basically. They would hang out in there, and then you would travel around, and then anytime you wanted to switch party members, you would go into that thing and just pull out your party. So everybody technically traveled with you, and they were always with you, but they weren't in the active party. That's a very video game terminology to use, and so trying to wrap that around to a semi-realistic, tabletop RPG, I don't know if I have the best answer for that, and that is a really good question. So I'm going to turn it to Christopher and Stan, if you guys have thoughts on when you have characters who need to not be there for an extended period of time, and then they come back, and sometimes it's easier to write that in. If you're in a town or you're between missions, then obviously that person just shows up, the other person left, no problem doing that. But what if you're in the middle of a heist, or you're in the middle of a last time you left off a session? Or do you not do like me and you always leave it at a point where players can rotate it out and have longer sessions?
Watching your streams and watching when 2 or 3 of our or 2 players of ours can't make it, I'm always like, well, wait a minute, shouldn't we be able to control the character? But we just drag them off the map, and it's weird for like 30 seconds. But this is a game about dragons, so I think we can handle some little thing. And actually, the way our group goes, it's so casual that it's like not a thing. Like, oh, so and so's not here and so and so's not here. We just drag them out, and then within a few seconds, we're back in it, and it goes. And the way that the certain party composition is. It just changes so like combats don't always look the same, and we're just get more creative, and sometimes it's like it adds to some of the excitement sometimes.
I do think party comp wise has actually been really interesting, not necessarily seeing the same, and I don't want to disparage obviously the same group coming, because that's what a lot of D&D is seeing all the same tactics and stuff. You level up, getting abilities, but it is interesting. On the benefit of having player rotation regularly is you do get more dynamic party compositions throughout different sessions, and how do they change their tactics and how do all their abilities mesh together. So that's an interesting benefit to having that.
I was going to say, I might not be the best person to answer this question, but we'll have fun with it. But the easy answer is they're with the wagon train. They're with the horses.
Yeah.
Or
they're just not on the map and that kind of thing.
Right. And I think for us that works very well. Like for the last session, Io was just taking care of the horses while we were doing camp and whatnot. And or she's the reason why Bond didn't lose the wagon, those kind of things.
Would it help, and all of you are in the Patreon D&D games, so would it help to mention that at the start of each session? And at this point, we've got a regular cast of 6 with 5 slots, so there's right now there's just one person who we'd have to mention. Would you all like that if we kind of included like, hey, here's what this person's doing, while you all are doing the active adventure right now? Because I think right now we've almost been ignoring and just kind of moving forward.
I think it would work.
Yeah. Come up with some, and maybe that's something we can do with the players' help too, like leading up to the session, to say, hey, if you can include a little blurb about what you're doing. The only part that's going to get really weird again is if we have to, and it hasn't happened too much, but there are long dungeon crawls, For example, we had the one spoilers on our patron D&D game, I guess, between the end of the crypt and the start of the cult temple level, where you guys were just in the middle of a dungeon. So if we had player rotation in that one, then that gets a little wonky, because it's like, all right, this person just said, hey, I need to go back to the surface or whatever, and then the other person, like, it's a tag team effort. But you could still do that. I mean, it happens. But it will be harder to do when you're in the middle of those kind of situations.
The other thing is we don't play weekly, so monthly you have an additional advantage, which is the recap is where everybody gets back into story, right? So controlling that recap, you could retcon, the swap.
True.
Because I don't know about the rest of you guys. I take notes, but it's not until we talk about where we are or why we're here one more time, right as we're starting, that I'm back in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Recaps for the win. I'm a big fan of doing that, especially when we'd have 2, 3, and 4 weeks between sessions, for sure.
The other thing I've done is my players will control, if someone's out, they will control that character, other than, like, especially in combat. It's like, I'm not going to run your person for you. You guys can run that. If it's any role playing something, whatnot, I'll step in and I'll do some of the RP for them. But I'm also the guy that has killed a character in those terms. Guy wasn't there, his buddy was running it.
Wow.
I set a trap of, hey, we need a healer. And the guy playing the paladin grabs his cleric buddy's character, and the two of them ran right up. It was a trap, and they got wailed on. And I killed the cleric. I killed the party's cleric.
When the player wasn't there.
Player wasn't at the table.
Oh my gosh.
It's like, you were authorized to run that character, and
yeah, if you had the keys to the car, and
my ongoing plug for of Dreaded Accursed, I used some up-amped whites and dropped them. You go to 0 points from a white, you're dead, and you come back 24 hours later as a zombie. There was no chance of bringing him back.
The player comes back and like, your character sheet just says zombie now.
No, they tossed his body into a forge. They turned him to ash.
That's fair.
It's like, it's what he would have wanted. He wouldn't have wanted to be undead.
Very fair.
He was the cleric. So, yeah.
It would be better if that person didn't find out until the recap.
Oh my gosh, that's terrible.
We made him tell his buddy. He had to go to college the next day and tell his buddy, I'm the reason your character's dead.
Wow, that would be interesting. Yeah, I definitely don't want to have anybody controlling. Again, our patron D games a slightly different situation, but I don't have anybody controlling those extra players. And frankly, and the reason, the other reason I capped it off at 5 is I think it's just easier to balance D&D as well with 5. I think already D&D is already balanced for 4, and you have to kind of increase, especially with long-term veterans as we are, you have to kind of increase the difficulty as it is with 5 players. And then everything just takes a lot longer with going beyond that. So, but yeah, I like the idea of mentioning it in the recap, and even if we don't do it during the session, then surely we can come up with, some logical means. But again, I try to run a game that, exists in this reality, but yes, this reality is a realm of magic where people can, zip in and out and all that. It's almost MCU like, kind of where it's this hyper realistic where, I imagine a lot of people have normal day-to-day lives, but then on the other hand, there's, alien invasions and, Wong teleporting through portals and busting Abomination out of prison and all that good stuff. Joke's good show.
Spoilers.
Yeah.
So Stan, let me ask you a question, and maybe this is a topic for another roundtable. How do you deal with players that get super attached to their character? Do you see that and then you kill that character?
How do you live with yourself?
No. I meant like
Actions have consequences. Darn it.
I've seen characters die, and the player takes it, like like a pet dying, actually, or
No, that's
deeper than
worse.
that.
That's worse. I've had players that I could kill their character, but if you touch my dog,
No. Yeah, it's a
I
bad example,
actually,
but I meant.
no, I actually had to turn someone's pet dog into an onyx statue, so I could use
their
AoE
character.
against the party. So the dog would go into a statue, and they could bring it back the next dawn.
It's why you can't take Dogbeat along in the Fallout games. Like, you can't do it. That dog has realistic, like, whining sounds. Like, I'm not gonna take that dog into combat with me. Fuck no. I don't care how loyal Dogmeat is. He's staying at home like a good boy, and he's not gonna risk his life.
It's a lot easier to kill off a character than it is to kill off one of their pets, because they will hurt you. See, I play Roundtable. I don't play over a VTT. They will hurt you.
You know what's funny is so most of you should have gotten your art by now from shout out to Jimmy McClure. And I know Brandon mentioned, he's like, oh, I wasn't, I was being like half suicidal with my character before, just having fun with him. But now that I saw the art, I'm kind of attached to him. I'm like, yeah, that's probably going to happen.
Yeah, it's actions have consequences. I have at one point in the girls' game, everybody but the cleric went down. One character was dead, 2 were unconscious. She went Marine Corpsman. Who cares about the dragon flying overhead? Started picking up other characters,
Nice.
firemen carrying them into a temple, throwing them down, and it was a great heroic thing. And she brought everybody back. She was the absolute hero, the boss of that session. And I'm just going with what the dice do. So, but
player death is certainly a different topic to talk about, but
well, player death and player character death.
Sorry, player character. Please
things.
don't kill your players. PSA. Please don't kill your players. Yes, player character death is certainly a which is probably worth revisiting, because I think it was one of my earliest ones, and I don't think we've revisited since then. And I don't actually have a lot of experience with that, although now I do have some experience.
That shirt that I wear for the patron games, that is my Killer DM shirt with the skull and crossbones. That's what they called me, was the Killer DM, way back when I was in college. But in that game, talking about player rotation, we were playing Robotech sci-fi, and we had a carrier with all of our fighters in it. We never knew who was going to be there on a Friday night. So whatever the mission was, you never scripted anything on players. Whoever shows up's going on the mission. And they'd go out, and everything was supposed to be resolved in that one game.
That's how I was when I initially did the Patreon D&D games. That's kind of how I was picturing it. Is, if you recall, it was they were one shots, so it was a complete mission. So it was like, hey, and so there wasn't going to have to be any in-game reason for player rotation. It was just, hey, you're all part of this faction, and then whichever of you happen to be there and get the call, you get to go out and do this one mission. So structurally, I think the one shot probably worked better for player rotation. Had we had more aggressive player rotation, if we had more people coming and going, I think that would have fit the bill better and been easier to parse. But since we ended up having a more consistent group of players, and it was much easier to prepare on my end to switch to a campaign, you still run into the kind of wonkiness of the player rotation versus the one shot. But I think it ultimately works better, and I'm having a blast doing Fire the Ghouls. But yeah, that's what reminded me of it, is that was my original plan. And if you recall, everybody's part of that Kalinar's crew, like, faction, and you were all getting sent out on those missions. You weren't on a carrier, but you were at the adventurer's base or something. You're all getting called out to do these missions, versus just being this one group. Now, it'll be interesting if we have more players rotate into the Patreon D&D game, how we incorporate that. We'll pick them up, and they'll can just be part of the ongoing group that thus travels. If somebody were to permanently leave that group, then we just basically gradually not talk about them and kind of forget about them. I don't have, unless I have forewarning that the person's like, hey, I'm going to step out, but I'd still like to play another game. Then we can do something like what Stan's been talking about, where we're actually have like an episode where that character does this big moment and has this either blaze of glory or this fun, like, cinematic send-off where that they get captured or turned into a villain or something. But in order to pull that off, I would need forewarning from that player that that's something that can happen versus just kind of gradually or leaving without saying anything. In which case, I just kind of have to gradually forget about that player character and then move on with everybody else.
I couldn't be happier with the players we've had in the patron games. It's been so much fun.
I agree. Yeah,
you guys have been great.
It's been absolutely blessed. Yeah, talk about nerves when you first put that up together. Because I don't know, and thankfully because of these roundtables, I had gotten to know a lot of you, and obviously through the Discord chat, so it wasn't like completely walking into a blind date or something like that. I had a pretty good idea, but still you can know people, and then when you get to the table, personalities might flare or issues might arise or something. But holy crap, that has been an absolutely just flawless, joyful thing for me. It's still a lot of work to prep another D&D game. I don't think I could do more than my load right now, at least at the point I am in my life right now. But it's been absolutely fun to do that. I will say doing a campaign has lowered my stress level quite a bit compared to a one shot. It's been nice having that because it's what I'm used to doing with the live game as well, as having that structure there, the framework, and then kind of knowing what's going to happen, knowing the overarching story ahead of time, and then allowing me to do my thing and really, pull things apart and expand on things and focus on what I think is fun. And then, just creating a fun session. So I agree. I'm glad that was said. I guess we could do closing thoughts on player rotation, the ups and the downs and the experiences with it, and how we can turn it to our advantage or just mitigate any flaws that it has. Let's go with Christopher. Closing thoughts on player rotation.
I mean, life happens, and roll with the punches. It's it'll be better for everybody. In most cases, just kind of roll with it. We can all kind of accept and a quick change. And actually, 10 minutes goes by, you probably won't remember. You'll be in it.
Good advice. Genocider, closing thoughts on player rotation.
Yeah, I agree with Christopher. Like, you don't have to write like a perfect intro or a perfect exit for every character. Like, we're mostly adults here, and we all understand life happens, and just roll with the punches.
And sometimes it can depend on the player too. I think some players would really want to get into the world and the lore and be like, hey, I really want to introduce my character and I come from here and this is what I'm all about. And other players are going to be like, hey, I just want to quietly like show up and stay in the background and get to know everybody and tiptoe my way in and not have the spotlight be shown on me. And I think hopefully the DM can pick up on that and there's a conversation there, specifically when adding new players. So don't necessarily automatically thrust the spotlight on the new player because they might not like that, or they might like that and maybe they want to come out with a bang. So that's definitely something to discuss because there's a lot of different personalities that can show up. Stan, closing. Go ahead. Dude.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I was gonna say, if you got a cool story to tell, like tell it. Yeah. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
that's also why we're here.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's where in my experiences, you have sometimes where a new person comes in, they want to assume an existing character from the person that just left. Ooh. You have other times you have they want to go out in this memorable blaze of glory, either kill off my character for me or let me go home and recuperate and retire. Communicate with your players, find out what works for them, and see how you can incorporate that into the ongoing or surviving character's story, as the case may be.
For sure. Yeah. Don't, as has been mentioned, real life definitely happens. We'd all like to, I think, start with the original group, although maybe people in your original group suck. So, it might not, maybe you are looking forward to some player rotation. I don't know the situation, but it does happen. Don't let that necessarily end your game. And even what Stan was saying, like you may not even start with any of the original players that you started with, but the world can keep continuing and people will be able to come and go. I think of it like a TV show. Most TV shows obviously have their their main cast. Weirdly, The Walking Dead might even be the best example of this, where I think they barely have any of their season 1 cast left by the time they're in season 10 or 11. I think there's like 2 people now. I mean, even Rick Grimes got killed off. I think it's Carol and Daryl are the only, I think, because Denai Guerrero even left recently. So it's TV shows don't do that a lot. Obviously, there's usually main characters that stay in the whole thing, but it can happen where it's the world and the story of the world, and people come and go, frequently, and that's kind of how D&D campaigns could be run. Obviously, players are always the focus, but yeah, I think player rotation is just going to be a part of the game, and part of the DM experiences is dealing with that narratively, but also just dealing with it with new player personalities and finding out how best to incorporate them, and then how best to give your old ones a proper send-off if you're able to do that. All right, I think that will do it for this month's DM Roundtable. Thank you so much to Stan, Christopher, and Genocider for joining me, and thank you to all of the patrons. Shoutouts to Platinum patrons: Joe, Will, Thomas, Stan, William, Brandon, Genocider, David, Eclectic, Roleplayer Roll, Christopher, Brian, William, David, Corey, Coed, 1337, Kyle, Matthew, and Big Nut. And gold patrons: RPG Paper Crafts, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marcus, Dead Lizard, Lion, Sam, Lumpy Spuds, Jerome, Nathan, Faz Like a Tortoise, Scott, Stephanie, Refus, and Carolyn. Thank you all very much for your support. Hope I'll see you all again for next month's DM Roundtable.
See you guys.